Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Gay with God podcast. And as always, I try to listen to what you tell me. And y'all told me that you want to have Pastor Fran back, so he's back. And we are going to talk about his book, The Everyday Gospel, and the subtitle is Why and How an Evangelical Church Journeyed from Judgment to the Inclusion of LGBTQ People. So, Pastor Fran, thank you so much for coming back and being willing to talk more and to share this book with us.
Hey, it's great to be back with you. Hey, just a quick clarification in case your people go to look it up. It's the Everybody Gospel.
Do you know
Yeah,
I did the same thing. I read that. Now, this is why my cataracts are getting in trouble with me. I looked up the wrong one, and I'm like, well, where is this book? So please tell us the
okay. Well,
title.
it's the Everybody Gospel. I'm not much of a self-promoter, but I just didn't want someone to go to Amazon and say, I can't find this thing,
Well,
you
that's
know?
what Midge did, and then I even wrote it down in big letters, and I still didn't get it right. I'm having to anyway.
But I am excited to be back with you. I had
Yes.
such a good time last time we were together. I think you and I
Yes.
found that we like each other and enjoyed
Yes.
talking. It's a gift to be back
Yes.
back with you. So
Yes. So for those of you who have not heard the previous podcast with Pastor Fran, let me just give a little bit of bio information for him. That Fran Leeman is the founding pastor of LifeSpring Church in Plainfield, Illinois, along with his wife Linda and a few good friends. He has led this church for over 30 years. Fran is also the founder of the New Life for Haiti. Fran's book, The Everybody Gospel, chronicles his journey from a conservative evangelical mindset to embracing a bigger and more beautiful God, a richer understanding of the gospel and those in the LGBT community. And this is not the only book you've written, correct?
that's true. That's
Can you
true.
just name the other books that you've
Yeah.
written?
So I wrote a book a number of years ago called The Forgotten Way of Jesus, which is still in print and available on Amazon. I probably think a little bit differently about some things than when I wrote that book. It's been over a decade, but
Mm-hmm.
I wrote that out of kind of this just my own journey of a deeper and evolving view of what Jesus came to bring us.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I wrote a book which was kind of before our LGBTQ journey for heterosexual couples called Christian Sex, because as a pastor who counsels, so many couples struggle with that part of their
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote that, and I wrote a book for men called Brothers Together, which we've used in some of our men's groups, which is a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
small chapters to help guys kind of navigate their way to their own hearts
Mm-hmm.
and to an understanding of God that they can really walk out in their hearts and lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been good. And then I actually wrote it because I've done all this work in Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book for Haitian pastors and church leaders a number of years ago, a small book uh, called in Haitian Creole, it's Rejoindre la vie ancienne l'Église, which is rediscovering the life of the early church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so trying to take them back to some deeper things. Haitian Christianity is fraught with, this is going to sound harsh, sometimes some of the worst of our evangelical fundamental Christianity. And so the
Mm-hmm.
work I've done with pastors there is try to take them back to Jesus and get hold of the heart-oriented stuff that makes
Mm-hmm.
such a difference for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
anyway,
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Because I wanted to give all of it props. Go, go,
thanks.
go look him up. There's lots there to read. So let's just start with what inspired you to write this particular book, and what was it that prompted you to do that?
Well, for your listeners who listened to the last
Mm-hmm.
episode and know the story,
Mm-hmm.
this was a 6 year, I would describe it as a pretty harrowing journey in our church. I shared last time I kind of dodged all these questions around Christianity and those in the LGBTQ community for 25 years of my pastoral life, and then found myself in a place where, because some controversy erupted in our church over it, I couldn't really dodge it anymore. And then but I decided, I kind of told our leaders, I don't want to make any sudden moves. I feel like this is a big enough question that it deserves a significant process of reflection and discussion, prayerful reflection and discussion. So we did that, and it kind of got slowed down because of the pandemic, but it was 6 years from start to kind of finish. From the time I went to our elders and said, can we really talk this through, all these questions, until the day that I sat in front of our church and said, we're going to be an inclusive and affirming church instead of a judgmental and excluding church. That was 6 years. And I think I wrote it really for two. I like to write. I don't consider myself the world's. I'm not Shakespeare, although my father was a Shakespeare scholar, so he was an English literature professor. But I don't consider myself the world's greatest writer. I come by some love of literature, honestly, through my dad. But really, I guess there were two reasons. One was, even though I pastor a small to medium-sized church here in the Chicago area, I feel like as we try to turn these corners of greater acceptance, dignity, inclusion for everyone in the LGBTQ community, every voice helps. And I thought, particularly as a pastor, like I've read a lot of the books, good books that have come out in recent years, making the case for greater inclusion in the church of LGBTQ people. What I hadn't read was the story of a church that took that journey. And I thought, there are churches that take that journey, maybe not enough of them yet, but those stories need to be told, and our story needs to be told. And even if it isn't, 10 million people who read it, it's going to make a difference for somebody, and it's worth putting the effort into putting it into writing. The other reason I wrote it, probably really the primary reason, is I started realizing as we came to the end of this process in our church community that even once this process was over, I guess I should say this, on the outside, in some ways, our church looks like other evangelical churches, I suppose. We're a little different in that we have a weird blend, like in our worship of kind of the contemporary and the liturgical, So like we have a band that leads worship, but we also have communion liturgy that's participatory, and we do communion every week, and we pay some attention to Lent, and we have Ash Wednesday services, and all those, and we do the Stations of the Cross, which is really weird for an evangelical type church. But oftentimes we get people who walk through the door because they've been trying out the Baptist church and the Christian Missionary Alliance Church, and then they think, oh, we'll try out this LifeSpring Church, and they walk through the door, and they don't have any idea that we're an affirming and inclusive congregation. So I thought to myself, even once we make this decision, and this is proven to be true, we're going to have people walking in our door who are going to say, wow, I love this church, because our church, I mean, it's beautiful, it's warm, it's alive, it's this connected community of people. But then they're going to say, boy, I love this church. And then they're going to look around and they're going to say, are there gay people here? and
What the
then
what?
what the what? And I wanted to be able to take this little book and put it in their hands and say, listen, I get it. I know that you're wondering, how did we get here? And if you're curious, this is our story. Because the book, and from reading it, it has a couple chapters that are a little more, like it has one chapter that walks through the Bible passages. That chapter is a little more didactic. It has a chapter that tells a lot of history of the religious right and the political right. But outside of that, the book is our story.
Well, and it's written in such a conversational, I know that some of that is going to be a little bit different, but it's written in a way that I mean, it's like talking to you in person. So it's so conversational and engaging, and it's an easy read. It's not threatening. It's just it's well done. It's really well done because I get bored quickly. And if I start a book, and I usually always try to read the introduction, but some people's introductions I can't get through. It's just not fun. But yours was. I mean, it was like you engaged me from the very beginning, and
Mhm.
so I really think it's so user friendly, and it would be delightful for pastors every
Mhm.
pastor to read it, which of course most of them won't, but because
Right.
they're threatened and they're
Right.
scared and
Yeah.
they think that we're going down some sort of dark path. And
Right.
you and I talked a little bit ago that writing a book like this comes with a lot of baggage surrounding it because literally I was on Instagram. I made a post on somebody had done this song. She's quasi-Christian, let me say. She's wounded. She is a wounded Christian. So some of her music is about bashing the church, and lately she's been sort of coming closer to back home, so to
Mm.
speak. And so she had done some song, and I said, totally agree that gay people can be, I am gay with God. Gay people can be Christian. And if anybody wants to reach out and talk with me, I'm open to a conversation. Well, oh my gosh, over 50 or 60 people have already responded, and I would
Oh,
say over
goodness.
more than half is hate speech. And some people
Mm.
have reached out to
Right.
me, which I was so
Right.
grateful for. So, what kind of pushback have you had? Because you know that there's book banning all over the place, gay books, especially are getting banned. So,
Yeah.
what pushback have you had after publishing this book?
So, I think I mentioned last time one of the amazing things about our journey is the best thing I feel like the Lord led us to do was to really include our congregation in the
Mm-hmm.
process. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
just do this as it started in our leadership team,
Mm-hmm.
but it became a congregational process. So by the time we got through the process, we really didn't lose. We lost some people when the whole thing first erupted in our church, but
Right.
we only lost a couple of people along the way, which still blows my mind, but is a beautiful thing. So there wasn't a lot of pushback at the end of the process or when I started saying, "Hey, I'm going to write our story as a little book," the pushback has been some has been in the in the in the broader Christian community, in our
Mm-hmm.
area.
Yeah.
Some pastors who are critical of the direction that I went and
Mm-hmm.
the view that we embraced and the direction our church went. And some of that has been stuff that comes back to you through the grapevine. One pastor in the area, to his credit, and I think he's one of these guys who is afraid and a little trapped.
Mm-hmm.
But to his credit, he called me up directly and said, "Hey," it was kind of funny. He said, "Hey, I heard this about your church." He said, "It's not true, is it?" And I said, "Well, it actually is." And he was like, "Oh," and we had a good conversation. He let me kind of tell him the story, even though I know he disagrees. But there are other pastors in the area who's, uh, said pretty negative things to people
Mm-hmm.
and to me.
Mm-hmm.
One of those pastors, his church is less than a couple of miles from our church, is telling people in the community that I'm a false prophet.
Aw.
And because I think it's you to be gay, you know,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
uh, and of course because of the way they've read these passages, and I would say to some degree just their view of how to read Scripture overall.
Mhm.
uh, the thing that people sometimes love to say is that you're being unbiblical. If you would just take God's word seriously, you wouldn't go down these terrible paths.
Mhm.
Um, the other pushback has been on social media, and
Mhm.
I'm on Facebook, and I'm not I'm not a real aggressive person on Facebook. I sometimes get myself in a little trouble if I venture into the area of politics and I get pushed back on some of those things. But one of the things that happened after we kind of were making these transitions, and it wasn't just the transition of the LGBTQ stuff, it was the transition of resisting kind of being politically co-opted by one side. It was the transition of putting Jesus at the center of our theology. So one of the things we say around here about reading the Bible is the Bible is not a flat text. If you read Hebrews 1:1, right at the beginning of that letter, that I love what the writer says. He says, in the New Testament, he says, in the past, God spoke to our fathers, our Jewish fathers, at different times and in various ways. So he's saying, yes, God's always been speaking to our people, and they've been responding to that. He says, but in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, who is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his being. He's saying, we had pictures before, but now we have the personification of God, what we Christians call the incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
God in front of us that we can see. As John says, our eyes beheld him, our hands touched him, we heard his voice. So that was a big transition for us too. But Jesus, so I tell people you have to read the Bible. You have to start with Jesus and you have to read the Bible backwards and forwards from Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, then you won't get dragged away from Jesus by however you interpret something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so we made these transitions, and we had this couple who said, "Hey, we think that LifeSpring needs to reach more people because it's become this beautiful thing. So we want to pay for all this social media advertising for you guys." And so we started making these 1 minute video ads, which are mostly just me in front of a camera. Um, and and we started putting those out there, and they aren't ads specifically about LGBTQ stuff, but I do mention in some of the ads that one of the
Mm-hmm.
things about LifeSpring is we're realizing that a lot of Christians are tired of the judgmentalism of the church. And when I mention that in these ads, one of the examples I give is judgmentalism on LGBTQ folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of like those responses you get,
Yeah.
because people can comment on these ads, right?
Uh-huh. Yep.
And so we get all these comments on these ads about how we don't take the Bible seriously. We're just a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of terrible liberals. We're condoning sin. Um, but here's the flip side. We've had a ton of people walk through our door because they heard those ads
Yep.
and they said, "Oh, a church that really believes in the equality of everybody and everybody's value, that really believes in the grace of God for everybody." Um, so yeah, but there has been, and I'm a kind of a sensitive guy, so the pushback is sometimes hard for
Yes.
for me.
Yes.
I kind of have to take a breath and let myself wince for 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and then say, okay, somebody doesn't like me because, um,
The best advice
yeah.
I've ever gotten is that people say, when you get pushback, you're doing it right.
Yeah.
Because because you're speaking the truth and there's always going to be some sort of person that's going to push back. But if you're not speaking the truth, you're not getting it out there, then we haven't touched the market that needs it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the I was in a preaching conference over the weekend on Zoom, and the number one top reason that people don't go to church is the exclusion of LGBTQ. When they were
I
surveyed, that was the top thing.
Yeah. And here's the statistic. 40 million Americans have exited the church in the last 20 years. That's like 10% of the US population and a massive percentage of churchgoers. And
Mm-mm,
we always think, oh, that's just the younger generation, because the
mm-mm,
younger generation always wanders away and then some of them come back. But it's more than that.
mm-hmm,
It's even people my age who are saying,
mm-hmm.
I'm tired of the
Yes,
judgmentalism of the church.
yes. So, in this journey of writing this book, and I remember even with my memoir that there was a chapter that I avoided forever because I just didn't want to relive it and I didn't want to do it again. But what was the hardest part for you writing this book? Was there any particular chapter or part of the book that was just difficult to relive or to go through again?
I think again, I guess because I'm a soft-hearted guy, I think there are a couple of stories I tell in the book about people within our church community being really angry with me
Mhm.
and either talking about that with lots of other people or
Mhm.
just, coming and being angry with me. I tell the story of a guy who stood in our church cafe, kind of our lobby, after a conversation he and I had, and just screamed at me.
Mhm.
And that's still hard that's still hard sometimes for me to think about. The other thing that was sort of difficult just about writing the book was I felt sheepish. I had to go to quite a number of people and ask them, "Can I tell this story
Oh yeah.
about you?"
Yeah.
And some of those were stories about LGBTQ friends, but some of them were stories about people in our church as they navigated, stories about
Yeah.
them navigating this issue,
Yes.
these questions in our community, in our ongoing discussions.
Mhm.
And I felt like I was putting people on the spot, like
Mhm.
especially when you've watched somebody maybe make a good change in their thinking,
Mhm.
but you kind of want to tell the story, which starts with where they were and then
Yes.
how they worked through it.
Yeah.
Um, but the interesting thing is, pretty much everybody said, "Yeah, tell the story."
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
which was wonderful and
Yeah.
open-hearted of all of them to
Yeah.
gracious of them to do that.
Yeah,
So,
and that is hard because you don't want to be known as the one that felt that way, but we
right,
all have felt that way. I mean,
right,
you and I
right.
both stand in the same shoes that we were raised very fundamentally conservative Christian, and we all believed that. And
Yeah.
it took us all a journey to figure it out.
Yeah, I feel like with a regarding a number of ways my thinking has changed
Hmm.
in the last, I'll just say, decade. I feel like I'm always trying to say when I talk about how I look at something now, whatever the question is, I'm always trying to say to people, listen, I'm not trying to be judgmental. I did used to think this other way.
That's right. I was
That
you.
that was that was me.
Yep.
And people are around our church, they know when I describe me in my 20s, which was a long time ago now, I always talk about how I was the Bible answer man and I
Uh-huh.
I won I won every argument, but I didn't win any hearts because I was
Ah,
harsh, you know.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
want to be that guy who says, I'm not trying to judge where I came from, but I've seen better things,
Hmm.
so I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm not trying to, but I also have seen things now that I can't unsee, you know.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I thought it was bold in your book you mentioned that you did sermon topics even before you started this journey of really going down the road and asking these questions that somebody in the church had asked you to do as a part of your series, a topic on gay people in the Bible. And I thought, oh my
It's like it was like one of the dumbest things I ever did. Um, I mean, I say that jokingly, but I was unprepared. That first sermon that I ever preached, and we weren't really deeply into this process. We weren't really in this process at all. But I had begun to just kind of, because I knew people were talking, and I had begun to think about I'd begun to learn some new things about those passages of scripture that
gosh.
I had always been taught and told about in a certain way. And I was unprepared for some of the backlash
Yep.
from that sermon. I
Yep.
just thought, hey, my people love me in our church and they'll understand I'm on a journey of thinking about some of these things. But, that underestimates how much fear can be attached to certain topics,
Hmm.
especially maybe for Christians and in the
Yeah.
church.
Well, and I wonder too, because the women had showed up at your church by that point, and they were communing with you and having, services
Yeah.
there. So I always wondered which side that might have fallen on. Was it the people that wanted them to feel uncomfortable when you talked about it? They might have assumed that you were going to come down harsh. And so I just
right.
I thought that was either somebody wanting to make it better for the congregation, that you might have a good example of why we can include gay people in our church, but it could have gone the other way too, that they were hoping that you do one of the pound them
Yeah,
down.
right. Well, right after that sermon, um, a, a woman, representative of her and her husband, a woman sent me an email and expressed this to other people as well, um, that they really couldn't stay in a church where the pastor was not going to preach against sin,
Ah,
you know.
so they were hoping for that
Yeah,
probably. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I'm a sensitive, so I kind of wince and I'm like, because I think sin is a real topic.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
about it differently in some ways than I used to. I think
Uh-huh.
about it more deeply, I think, than I used to. But if someone says, Fran Leeman doesn't take the idea of sin seriously, that is just fundamentally not true. Um,
Yeah. I'm just grateful since coming to the Episcopal Church that I now have a more open and expansive idea of that sin is not, the hellfire brimstone that I was taught, that it really is
right,
missing a mark, that I've
right,
messed up and I can
right,
just repent, which is really just turning away, turning
right.
differently, going in a different direction. And it makes it my relationship with God better, because I did always see him as the really mean father, the bad
Yeah,
guy that's always waiting to
yeah.
punish you.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's not healthy for any
yeah.
of
I think
us.
I think most modern Christianity still kind of exists in a kind of master-slave paradigm in terms of
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how God relates to us,
Mm-hmm.
even though all of Jesus' portrayal of God in the Gospels runs counter to this. I mean, think of the
Mm-hmm.
story. I think the story of the prodigal son is the quintessential
Yes.
gospel story, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't contain any of this. We have the father running, hiking up his robes and running down the road
Mm-hmm.
to embrace his son,
Yep.
falling on
Yep.
his neck with kisses,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the kid is trying to confess his sins, and the dad's not even listening,
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's like, this is, how big is God's graciousness? It's bigger than
Mm-hmm.
we have known.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and it's interesting too that even when we try to give that kind of grace, as God would give grace, somebody's mad because they're not getting it.
right,
Just like the
right.
brother.
Right, just like the brother. Right, right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's that whole sense of like, the brother he's like, I've been earning this the whole time, and the father's answer is like, don't you know that everything I have is yours? Like you didn't have to earn anything.
Hmm.
Everything I have is yours. It was already yours. The
Yeah.
difference was the kid didn't know it.
Yeah.
He didn't
Yeah.
know it, just like most of us don't know that
That's right.
everything God has is ours.
Yeah. One of the things also that struck me in the book, and like I told you earlier, I haven't finished the whole thing because of other circumstances, but when you took those ladies out to eat and you sat down with them, that the first gay couple that actually stayed, and you and your wife took them out to eat, and I could feel that inner pain of and desperation of the one that cried and said, I didn't want to, we don't want to cause any trouble, and we're not even asking to serve. It's
Yeah.
like they had already locked themselves into such a submissive role in church that they knew that they weren't really it almost felt to me that they didn't feel worthy to be there. They didn't want to be really seen. They didn't want to cause any trouble. They just wanted to almost sit in the corner and be allowed to be present in the presence of God. And
If
it
I
just
if I
broke
yeah,
my heart.
if I were to put it in terms of racial struggle,
Yeah.
they were saying we're willing to sit in the balcony of the theater. You don't have to
Yes.
let us in the main floor as long as we can come
Yeah.
and somehow participate, which, and that was a really interesting part of this process for us. And I probably, some of your gay listeners will be like, they'll think you people are so slow on the uptake, so slow to learn. But coming from where we came from, the
Yeah.
first question is, oh, gee, can we accept, for example, gay people into the church,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you haven't even yet faced the question or faced the reality that your limited way of asking that question or of thinking about it is still entertaining the possibility that maybe the big place you'll arrive at is still where gay people are second-class citizens in your
Mm,
church.
mm-hmm.
But you can't see that because you're still thinking like, I don't know, is it okay that they even come?
Yeah.
That they even come to church? And the real question is, are you even seeing their humanity?
Yes.
This isn't a question of who you will tolerate,
Right.
right? This is
Right.
a question, this is a question of like Jesus in the Gospels, who will you see?
Yes.
Jesus sees people.
Yep.
Um, but early on, you can't, you know, like I think probably when I first heard them say, like, hey, we're not asking to do anything, we just want to be able to come worship Jesus, right? I probably thought, oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
that won't get me in too much trouble, you know? If you just
Self-preservation.
yeah, exactly. If you just can kind of quietly attend the church,
Yeah.
like maybe I won't get in too much trouble. And today, of course, I feel very differently. I look at all of that and I think where we are now. I say this all the time to people. I could never go back.
Yeah.
I could just never go
Yeah.
back, you know.
Yeah. That I did have one experience. The last time I went to church before I found the Episcopal Church was with a minister who said, "Well, yeah, I think it's okay that you're gay, but you can't tell anybody in the church because nobody else in the church is going to want you there. So just come in and I'll accept you in. Just don't tell anybody that you're gay, and then you'll be fine." And
And
I was just so desperate. I said,
right,
"Okay." And I
right.
came in, I never told a soul, stayed quasi straight the whole time. My
Yeah,
wife wasn't going, so nobody knew
yeah,
anything about it. So,
right.
but that was just so oppressive. And I wish churches would understand as you grew to understand is that, you know, we draw the lines. We draw the borders, we draw the lines, we put the barriers up at the church. Jesus never put up any barriers. He would touch anybody, he would eat with
Yeah,
anybody, he loved everybody, and there
yeah,
was no condemnation from him. Yeah, I mean, he set parameters, with the when he drew all that in the sand and he knew she was doing some, unhealthy things for herself in her line of
right,
work and just go and turn away from that. Go turn away
right.
from that and
And we were talking about sin.
mhm,
Sin, you and I were both taught about sin
yep.
in this simple model of sort of behavioral obedience, right? Here's the rules, here's the laws, right? And you either keep them or you don't. Here's all the things you should do and all the things you shouldn't do. But Jesus talks about the heart, right? He says the evil man brings out evil things out of the evil stored in his heart, and the good man brings out good treasures out of the good stored in his heart. There's a heart component of this. Today, mostly outside the church, people use this language of things like what's healthy and unhealthy, what's functional and dysfunctional. That's a tremendous insight to Jesus' understanding of sin. It's
Hmm.
not just whether you're keeping the rules so you don't get punished.
Right.
It's about whether you're becoming a more whole human being or are you going down paths that are harmful to you and harmful to other people. We have to think more deeply about these things
Hmm.
and not just like shallow religious people.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're missing the mark when we think that setting lines as to how we treat people based on their status or the color of their skin or who they love, that God is asking, well, Jesus is asking us to serve them. If you don't clothe them, you're not clothing me. If you're
Right.
not, there was,
Oh my
did I tell you this
goodness.
last time that somebody preached a sermon and the first thing he said was out of his mouth was, um, Jesus has AIDS. That was his first line. Shoop. And then he kind of unpacked that to bring us to the place where if we see someone with AIDS and we disown them or treat them horribly, that was Jesus. just like in that
Yeah.
whole thing about water and
Right.
clothe me
Yep.
and feed me,
Yep.
is
Yep.
that every time we disown someone based on their humanness, we've done it to Jesus. And the Christian nationalism that's going on in this country is trying to bring people back to a time where we were disowning every creation that God had made except for the superior race, as they think, and that
Hmm.
that Christianity has to be only done one way, where Jesus wasn't Christian. So number
Right.
one, this is a false premise
Right.
that it's fine that I identify as Christian, but my bigger picture is I follow Jesus.
Right.
And that's how we need to approach people now, is not with the blinders that everybody is making us put on and see it only this way. I think that loving Jesus and loving the people around us is way bigger than that.
I think this business of seeing God in every person,
Hmm.
it's easy to talk about. I probably have given lip service to that for decades, but to really come to terms with that, well, maybe that's not the way I want to say it. I just think that we today, as followers of Jesus, need to reflect on this and embrace this in a far greater way than we have. I love this quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, where he was reflecting. I think it was like an Advent reflection. He was reflecting on the incarnation, and he says this simple line, meaning sort of, here's what's true after the incarnation. He says, um, from this point on, Christ walks the earth in the form of your neighbor.
Ooh.
And I was like, that has just been such a thing for me. And I think I mentioned I'm kind of a Richard Rohr fan, and
Hmm.
Richard Rohr talks a lot about seeing God everywhere and in all things and in all
Hmm.
people.
Yeah.
And that has become a daily mantra
Yeah.
for me. The
Yeah.
first part of my morning prayer now every day is, this is what I say to the Lord. I say, me and you in me, you everywhere, in all things, in all people.
Mm.
And sometimes I say it 10 times over until my mind and my heart again go, yes, that's it. That's
I
it.
I heard a technique one time where they say that if you're holding any animosity or anger or hate towards someone, pretend that you're in a theater and you're in the pews or the seats, and you bring the person onto stage that you absolutely detest or have an issue with, and you sit there radiating love toward them, divine love toward them until you really feel it. And I'm like, well, today I'd be cemented to that
Right,
seat.
right, right,
But I
right.
mean,
But that's the rub of it,
yes.
is that none of this that we talk about, when we talk about seeing God in people, when we talk about the dignity of people, the value of every person, none of it is because it's easy.
Mm-mm.
It is a road back from what we have learned to cultivate
Hmm.
in ourselves. It is a
Yes.
journey back in general and maybe with particular people. But that's why it's so important. I mean, when Jesus tells the disciples to forgive 70 times 7, they basically say he's insane,
Yep.
right? Like, this is crazy.
Yep.
And Jesus is not saying it because he's saying, like, this is easy,
Yep.
right? Um,
Yep.
yeah, so I just think we have so far to go. And when you really start to
Yes.
think big about these things, when you really start to think big about seeing God in everyone, then when you come back to asking questions like, can I see God in people with a different skin color, or of a different religion or
Hmm.
nationality, or a
Hmm.
different economic class, or a different uh, sexual or gender identity? The answer
Hmm.
is, well, of course I can.
Yep.
Of course I can. But
Yep.
you have to see it big. We've so much of our modern Christianity has made God smaller. And when you
Hmm.
make God smaller, you see God in fewer places.
Hmm. And we've got to remember that God is still speaking.
Yeah,
It's not just, he didn't like end the Bible at Revelation and say, okay, I'm done.
right,
God is
right,
still speaking, and we are still being used by him. I did a sermon this past weekend with a cohort group, and I talked about that we are not puppets on a string, that
right,
God is still working through us to do what we're inspired to do, that jobs that we've been given to do. And it's not because he's making me do it against my will, that God is asking me, nudging me through the Holy Spirit to do something. And I'm either going to say yes or no. And if I say yes, then God takes me to people and places, and life-changing things happen. For someone, it may not be me, it may be part of what they needed, or I might get something, or we both
Yeah.
might benefit. But we still have to be open to those nudges, and then because God is still speaking and Jesus is still working through us.
Yeah, we get to participate.
Yes.
And it's an
Yes.
amazing thing. So if you'll indulge me, you just sparked something in my thinking. I really feel like I want to say, and I hope it's
Okay.
encouraging for some of your listeners. I can see people that I know listening to this podcast right now, and they're saying, wait a minute, this Midge is a gay woman, and she's talking about having the Holy Spirit
Mm-hmm.
and being led by the Holy Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And about bringing good things to other people. And the paradigm some people think in, they would say, well, it doesn't work that way. It can't work that way because there's this
Mm-hmm.
problem, right? With
Mm-hmm.
gay people. So one of the big questions for me and I was well into this process that we went through in our church before this, what now seems like an obvious question, kind of just like appeared before my mind. And the question was, in the way that I think about being a human being and about spiritual growth and about what the New Testament says about the fruit of the Spirit and what this new human being that God is creating in us through Christ and through His Spirit, what that new human being actually looks like. Is there a reason for me to think that that the direction of a person's sexual desires or the way they identify or think about their gender or struggle with that or whatever, are those things deal breakers that keep them from experiencing the transforming work and life of God as described in the New Testament? So I went back to places like Galatians where Paul
Mm-hmm.
says, and the fruit of the Spirit's work in us
Mm-hmm.
is love, joy, peace, patience,
Mm-hmm.
kindness, goodness, gentleness,
Mm-hmm.
faithfulness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And I thought to myself, I know gay people, including my brother-in-law, who I shared
Yep.
about last
Yep.
time,
Yep.
who are on that very journey.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so unbelievable for me?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I think that the direction of a person's sexual desires or the way that they identify in terms of gender is going to keep them from being, especially if rest in Christ and the manifestation of love out of our lives, if these are the higher things, right? And the whole New Testament says this is it, love,
Yep.
right?
Greatest
Doesn't
command.
say, right, doesn't say this is it, this direction of your sexual desire, or,
Mm-mm.
it says this is it. This is love. Like I love in First John when John says, this is how we know we've passed from death to life. We love our brothers and our sisters. That's how
Mm-hmm.
we know we've even passed from death to life. We've become people of love. So what is it about the direction of a person's sexual desires or gender that's preventing that journey? And when I asked the question that way, the answer was as clear as could be to me.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing.
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 Mm-mm.
It's not the core of our spiritual journey, the core of becoming a new human being. I'm not saying that our sexuality is not important or that our relationship with our gender and how we think about that is not important. I'm not downplaying those things. I'm just saying that the core of our journey into being a new human being is not rooted centrally
Mm-mm.
in those.
No,
Anybody can be made into a new human being by God.
because if that were true, then even heterosexual people, based on how they live their sexual life, would be more prominent than how God works through them and how they
Right,
live their life in all other aspects, because we are a
right,
total package, not just one
right.
thing.
Exactly. We are a total package. I'll put myself back 10 years ago. We who were ruling out people in the
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ community,
Mm-hmm.
we were placing an undue importance on these characteristics of a person's life. I remember the first time it dawned on me that, well, it was a common thing in the circles of conversation I was in years ago that when it would come up that, for example, somebody was gay, some person that we knew, there was this kind of dismissive thing like, oh, well, they're gay. And it was like, and the subtext of that, often unspoken, but the subtext of that was that means that they're kind of fundamentally flawed as a human
Mm,
being and probably ruled out of having a meaningful journey with God unless they change, right?
mm,
And then here's the thought that came to me, Midge. What if I were standing on the edge of a circle of people and my name came up and they
mm.
didn't know I was there and I was eavesdropping and someone said, oh, well, Fran Leeman, he's heterosexual. That's all you really need to know about him.
That's right.
What I would think is, wait a minute, there's way more to me than that. I'm a person with emotions and feelings and a heart. I'm a person who loves
Yeah.
God. I'm a person who values friendships. I'm a person who has not only fears and wounds, but also hopes and dreams, right? Like I'm a person. And if somebody dismissed me because I was straight,
Hmm.
I would think I was being sold short. And that was exactly what I and so many of the people I was around were doing to other people. And, when I saw that, I just thought, well, this is the dumbest thing in the world.
And yet it is. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But
Well,
this whole journey that your church took, I just wish that we could get it out to absolutely everybody and everybody would be open to receive it. But we know that it's baby steps and it's a journey. But you guys took the most incredible risk, and you personally and your committees, you took such a huge risk. And that's how I know without a doubt that God was present through the whole thing, because this could have blown up your church, it could have blown up your community, and it does what God does. It multiplies. The
yeah.
fishes the fishes and the loaves and all the abundance in the sea. It's like just go with me and
Yeah, just
it's all
go.
gonna
And,
come.
as far as multiplying, I think I told you last time,
Yes.
one of the
Yes.
interests, I feel like the Lord took us on this journey in our church. The timing of it is just too uncanny because there is this slowly rising tide of Christians, maybe more in some geographic places than others, but slowly rising tide of Christians who are rethinking some
Yes.
things.
Yep.
And they're hungry to find their way back to that more Christ-like and Jesus-centered kind of faith.
Yep.
And they're walking through our doors here at LifeSpring.
Hmm. Hmm.
We had 6 new families yesterday. We're not that big a church.
Yeah, you've got parking and chair problems.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we got parking and chair problems. And 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 I'm still sort of experiencing the surprise of that because in some
Yeah.
ways I thought we're going to make some of these changes, we're going to evolve in some of these ways, and then we'll die as a result.
Uh,
But there is this rising bit of hunger out there of people who are saying, I think we missed some things.
uh,
And I think if we get Jesus back in the middle, it's going to be way better.
yeah. That's where we got to focus for sure.
Yeah.
I hate that our time is almost up. This is really sad.
But it's been so fun.
I know. I feel like we just need to put on another pot
Yeah.
of coffee.
There you go.
We're not done. Well, I
Yeah.
so appreciate you so much, and I'm loving your book. I can't wait to read more, and I just want to thank you for popping into my life and making me aware of you and your church. And if I can ever be of any assistance to you guys, please let me know, because I just think you are the picture of what church needs to be, and you are also the people that I would want to worship with. So,
Mhm.
from a religiously traumatized child, I wish I had found y'all sooner.
We have folks coming into our church, some of whom
Yep,
are LGBTQ folks, who literally have said to us, I've been searching for this church for 10 years.
absolutely.
which of course
Absolutely.
warms my heart. Of course, you know what my joke is? I tell them, well, it's a good thing you didn't find us 10 years
Well,
ago.
that's what the priest told me. Midge, you wouldn't have liked the Episcopal Church when we first
Right,
started. He said,
right.
"I'm glad you got here after we
Yeah,
made
yeah,
our
yeah,
own changes." But
yeah.
many churches are that way. But I want
Well,
to thank you.
you're welcome, and I thank you. You're a breath of fresh air. I've really
Oh,
enjoyed this.
oh yes. Well, don't rule me out. I might be calling on you again.
I would
We'll
love that.
we'll think of something.
I
But
would love that.
I appreciate you so much. So guys, go to the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com. You will see Pastor Fran's information. You will see the link to his book, The Everybody Gospel. The Everybody Gospel. And you can also find him on Amazon with his other books. So just go take a little tour. And remember that we have our own community, Gay with God, on Facebook. And if you join that group, you will be able to come to the Faith Journey group on Zoom once a month where we support each other and help each other. And right now, guys, this is what we need. We need community. It doesn't matter if it's on Zoom or Brewskis or wherever we go. We need to be in community and stay supportive of each other. These are hard times, but they're not the last of times. We're still going to be up, right, and breathing. And as long as we're doing that, we can still be the hands and feet of Jesus. So come get support in the Gay with God group. And if you are listening to this podcast and are questioning whether you can be gay and be in a relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as LGBTQIA+, or not even sure if you're gay, God has always been within you. And even when you didn't know it, you have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned to see how you can join the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.